Signs. Signs have always been a part of the Bible story of redemption and of what it means to know God and to encounter God in so many different ways. Think of the signs that you remember from the Bible stories. The pillar of fire by day, the cloud by day, the fire by night. They're called theophanies in the Old Testament, these outward and visible signs that somehow or another God was present and was guiding people. The truth is, in the ancient world, they were a little bit superstitious, you know that. But they tried to find the hand of God in earthquakes and in lightning and in tempest. That same thing made its way into the New Testament, maybe a little bit differently. But it's true for us. We know the signs that pointed us towards Jesus as the Messiah. Think of a couple of them. The Magi following the star to Bethlehem. That was a sign. Think of what the angel said to the shepherds. Go and find a baby wrapped in swaddling clothes and lying in a manger. That will be a sign to you. So when Jesus speaks of the final end of all things and he tells us to look for the signs, he's not really telling us anything differently. Not exactly. Except I suspect you and I no longer look for the same signs in life that they looked for back then. The signs that we look for are a little bit plainer, maybe a little bit easier to read. Road signs, store signs. We don't look up at the heavens and wonder if God is angry today or not. But we do look around us and ask ourselves, to what are all the signs of life pointing? I have to tell you that road signs and church signs are a part of my favorite experience anytime we go to Georgia for Thanksgiving. Let me tell you what I mean. We have about 2.5 hours of farmland and country churches in between Atlanta and the town where we go, and every single church sign has a pithy message for travelers by to read. Now, in honesty, most years at Thanksgiving, you can predict what they're going to say. Thanksgiving is thanks living. Over 50% of the churches have that on their signs every year. If you go, be prepared. But there are others. Most of them, to me, are kind of funny. A common one says, sign is broken, come inside for the message. Not bad. One that I saw once said, the pastor told me to change the sign, so I did. That's why we don't have a sign here. But there are others. Close to my family's house, there's a church. And it has a sign out front, as churches do. And it's the name of the church, although I think it's probably the funniest of all of the signs. This is the name of their church. Overcoming Ministries of Jesus Christ. Think about that for a second. Overcoming Ministries of Jesus Christ. I laugh every time I walk by. But I know they wouldn't, and I don't mean it badly, but I've wondered if maybe a comma or an apostrophe might help us to figure out exactly whose ministries they're thinking that they're overcoming. Certainly not Jesus himself. Well, anyway, this year's trip brought a new gem to the collection. It wasn't a church sign, it was a Dairy Queen sign. And the Dairy Queen sign said this: there is power in Jesus, double cheese combo. Now, I suspect whoever put up that sign meant two different things. The first was that there is power in Jesus, and the second was that they have a double cheese combo for $5.69. But that's not what it said. It said, there is power in Jesus, double cheese combo. Amen. Well, In a strange way, a particular ritual has begun for me. And that is, every year at Thanksgiving, if we happen to be there, these signs are always, they help to put me in the Christmas spirit, or at least in the Advent spirit, because we always begin Advent with Jesus telling us the same thing. Pay attention, be awake, and always look for the signs. There's a reason for that, I think, a good reason. It's a reminder that the first time Christ's coming was not just a singular event, narrowly limited to Bethlehem so many years ago, but that through the years we have learned to see that he comes again and again in the faces of so many people, strangers and friends alike, and that we are always to watch for him. Not all of them recognized him the first time, did they? And the same could happen again. That seems to be his way, his holy and elusive way. He once told Mary Magdalene not to hold on to him. And somehow, I think that message is echoed to us, that we can't hold on to him either in whatever singular way we have found him. There's always more that simply isn't his way. So we have to look for the signs. We have to look for him and to know him when he comes in that same stealth and elusive way, so that we will recognize him and that we will find him. With that in mind, our scriptures this morning point us in different ways with their own particular signs. The first one that we encountered is from the prophet Jeremiah. The days are surely coming, he says, when God finally will fulfill his promises. The great rabbi of the 20th century, a man named Abraham Heschel, wrote that the story of Israel is always a story of waiting for God, of waiting for God's arrival. And I think in a way we share with them in that hope of waiting for God to arrive, that despite the various and sundry chances of this mortal life, it is not foolish to hope that the ways of God's righteousness are still to come, and that we can work toward them ourselves. God's righteousness is still coming and growing and taking hold in us, and we are always to wait for it and to believe in that promise. But waiting isn't easy, is it? At our house, in its own way, it began yesterday with a common refrain: can we go ahead and open one present? And I thought, my goodness, it's only the 1st of December. We have a long way to go. The story of the people of God is always a story of waiting for God's arrival and action. That's what the first sign says: wait and hope until. Our second sign this morning came from 1 Thessalonians. 1 Thessalonians, scholars say, was probably the first of all of the New Testament actually to be written down. And in it, I would say you might notice a simplicity of the gospel, a simplicity that began before well-meaning centuries of Christians had a chance to regulate and to complicate the good news of Christ. And in the verses that we read this morning, the sign reads simply: love until. Love until God's promises are fulfilled. Love until righteousness takes place in the earth. Love until Christ comes and redeems all things. but be sure to love until. And then we come to the third sign. This one comes from Luke's Gospel. Be alert, Jesus says, and pray, and learn to stand so you will find him when he comes. But this one to me is not so simple, is it? I hope that Good Shepherd is not full today of people who expect to read a particular passage of Scripture and then for its meaning to be immediately clear. If so, this isn't the sign for you. I also hope that Good Shepherd isn't full today of people who expect the sermon to clear up its ambiguity. Every time Jesus talks of the end of the world, I never know exactly what to make of it, if he meant that metaphorically, or if he in himself really did see a day coming when these things would happen, and he might come again and set all things as they ought to be. And I don't think that it's just that the Bible was written in a different language and in another age and in a culture so different than ours. That difference is always there and has to be negotiated. But the bigger issue to me is what we do when we are confronted by scriptures with these and we look to them to guide us and to help us make sense of life and of our journeys together with God. Because sometimes, honestly, instead of giving to us easy answers, they present us with a new form of mystery. Of course, a life of faith is always to be filled with lots of mystery. Look around us. It's no irony that our place of worship is filled with stained glass and sun that sometimes shines through it, and candles that pierce the darkness, and bread and wine that are taken as tokens that point to a different reality. That, of course, is the story of our faith. That in the face of such desire for answers, we're also provided sometimes only with mystery. But in fairness also, when the world around us gives us mystery, Christ offers to us a point to it all. That when the world is full of fear and disheveled by signs that point to the end of it all, we might raise our heads and hope. Because in that, he says, our salvation is getting nearer and nearer. But of course, you can't put that on a bumper sticker. It's hard to fit that all on a church sign, isn't it? But when the world gives you nothing but trouble and fear, raise your heads, he says. Salvation is always coming near. There's one other church sign I want to tell you about this morning. It's closer to home. It was somewhere in northern Maine, and I saw it this summer as we were driving to Canada. It was, I believe, a Unitarian church, although I'm not sure. All of my family was asleep, and I was driving quietly and speeding a little bit. But I'll never forget what it said. Christ is never enough. Imagine, Christ is not enough. Imagine putting that on your Christmas cards this year. Merry Christmas from Waban. Christ is not enough. But it's funny, isn't it, how sometimes a message like that can really find its way into your soul and challenge you more than thanks living is thanksgiving, to make you wonder exactly what it is that they had in mind. Christ is not enough. I have no idea what point they were trying to make. But maybe this year, as we begin this sacred journey toward Bethlehem again, we could begin with that thought in our minds. Christ today is not enough. I'll tell you what sense I have made of that. Here's the first. Every year in December, it seems to me that something happens either on a personal level or on a national level where we all shake our heads and wonder where God was. Think of the Newtown school shooting that happened only a few days before Christmas. Think of Richard Nixon's famous Christmas bombings. Think of the stories of your lives where, as you prepared to come together with family or friends, maybe something happened and you shook your head and wondered, where was God in this, and why did God let this happen? On days like that, sometimes it feels like Christ is not enough. Christ is not enough, but of course he will be. That's how the story finishes. That's what our gospel says, and that's what our faith teaches us. That Christ now may not be enough to overcome all of those things, but one day that will be different when death is swallowed up forever, and we will be more perfectly with God. Christ is not enough, but one day he will be. The other way in which I hear that message, and I think it comes as a wonderful challenge and reminder to each of us each year in December, is a call from him to us. That he is not enough on his own because he uses us in wonderful ways. That we are still his hands and feet. And if the poor are to be cared for, and the hungry are to be fed, and good news is to be proclaimed to all people, then Christ alone is not enough, because he uses us in the proclamation of that good news. He is our wild and beautiful hope. And until then, we are a part of that message coming, to live sometimes for the sake of others, to bring hope to the world, to continue to love until. And until then, we have to look. We have to look, Jesus says, for all the signs, so that we might find him. That, of course, has always been his way. Look, he says, and there will be signs. Christ is not enough, but indeed he will be. God willing, his kingdom is still yet to come. One day he will be. And until then, our journeys of faith and of love and of service compel us until we find him. Amen.